In the late 90s, Arsenal was struggling in the Premier League. They would finish in 10th and 12th place in the league, desperately trying to fix their managerial situation and get back on top to contend for the title. But the craziest part was that their solution was to bring in a manager that nobody had heard of, all the way from the Japanese league, in a club called Nagoya Grampus 8. It was a move so shocking for the Arsenal fans that even the local newspapers couldn't help but infamously headline the announcement asking the iconic Arsene who? But little did they know that no-name manager Arsene Wenger would eventually end up bringing Arsenal their most successful and consistent period in Premier League history, managing to pull off a domestic campaign so dominant that literally nobody could beat them. For a time, they were so unbeatable that, in the words of the legendary manager himself,
I threw up sometimes after the games when I lost. It hurt so much. The defeat remains with you forever.
In football, the difference between success and failure often comes down to a single moment. Any team can beat another on any given day, but that's what makes Arsenal's 2003-2004 season an unparalleled anomaly in modern football. They played an entire 38-game Premier League campaign without a single defeat, something that has never been repeated in English football. Even Sir Alex Ferguson's Man United treble winners or Pep Guardiola's Man City treble winning side, as dominant as they were, all stumbled at one point. So how did Arsenal, a team that was once known for its boring football, without the bottomless financial resources, manage to achieve something no one else has? How did Arsene Wenger transform a struggling and boring club to eventually withstand an entire season of relentless competition without losing? Well, before the arrival of Arsene Wenger, Arsenal had built a reputation for its defensive dominance. However, while this defensive solidity brought trophies, it also earned them the reputation of boring Arsenal. After manager George Graham was dismissed in 1995 due to financial scandal, the club went through one of its poorest forms in decades. Despite signing generational talents like Dennis Bergkamp, the club still lacked any identity. Meanwhile, other clubs like Man United had become a dominant force in English football, winning multiple league titles and playing a more dynamic style under Sir Alex Ferguson. That's why the club's decision to bring in a relatively unknown Frenchman named Arsene Wenger during a time of crisis was met with such strong skepticism. But Wenger was no ordinary manager. He arrived with a clear philosophy, one that prioritized technical ability, attacking football, and meticulous preparation. At the time, his approach was revolutionary for English football. He would introduce strict dietary and fitness regime, banning the drinking culture that was so prevalent in English football, while implementing advanced training methods that emphasized speed, stamina, and ball movement. Wenger wanted Arsenal to play a brand of football that was quick, fluid, and entertaining. Transition swiftly from defense to attack, overwhelm opponents with pace and movement, and probably most importantly, allow players to play freely without restricting their best abilities. And to do this, he had to build the right squad. Because beyond tactics, Wenger had an eye for talent. He would scout the type of players that at the time were probably overlooked by traditional English clubs and scouts. Players who were talked down about because of their struggling form or inability to fit in with their current club or league playstyle. But Wenger had a different vision for these players. Maybe they were mavericks or high risk, but when he looked at them, he saw guys who could execute this high-tempo, technical style of play but still had that individuality and creativity to perform beyond the mere tactics demanded of them. And over the years, he carefully assembled a squad that would form the backbone for the Invincibles. His first and one of the most important signings was Patrick Vieira. If you don't quite know just how important he would be at Arsenal, or just how good he was overall, this might give you an idea.
And you've got to take a player out that you think would damage them most. The Arsenal Invincibles in 2004, I would take Vieira out.
Roy did take Vieira out.
Right. I'd take Vieira out.
However, before joining Arsenal, he was a relatively unknown French league midfielder who had just finished going through a disappointing single season with AC Milan. But under Wenger, he would develop into a truly world-class midfielder, not only helping Arsenal get back on top, but also being one of the best French footballers in the world that, alongside Zidane, would play an important part in a midfield that would eventually win the World Cup and Euros. Vieira easily deserves a video on his own, honestly, but for now we'll keep it a bit brief. Basically, he was a complete midfielder. Intelligence, skill, athleticism, and physicality. Not only was he an incredibly creative playmaker, deadly accurate passer, and graceful dribbler, but he was also an incredibly competent tackler. His physicality and stamina made him incredibly good at both defending, then going on to lead the counterattack himself. That was the kind of midfielder he was. Easily one of the best and most underrated in a generation of all-time great midfielders. It's not hard to see why pundits who played against him rate him so highly and valuably to Arsenal and France's success. But easily the biggest signing that Wenger would ever make in his career would be when he decided to sign Thierry Henry. Right now it seems like a no-brainer. Because back then, while Henry was making waves in the French Division 1, being named the Young Player of the Year and even winning a league title with Monaco, he was actually struggling immensely when he made the move to Juventus. The defensive dominance of Italy back then was proving to be a challenge, and in 19 matches, Henry would only score 3 goals. Juventus fans were incredibly disappointed in Henry. The Henry hype died incredibly quickly, but Arsene Wenger saw potential. He imagined a way to use Henry to get the most out of him. So when he signed the 23-year-old winger, the very first thing he would do was move him up to play as a forward. And this was the best move of Henry's career. With that change, Henry was able to maximize what he did best, drifting into left side half space where he was nearly impossible to mark. From there, his runs to the box made him a nightmare for defenders. And because he didn't need to play so deep or help on the defense that much, it meant that on the counterattack, he was high enough to leave defenders in the dust. His ability to carry the ball in stride at full speed was unmatched. Finessing shots into the bottom corner, scoring from tight angles, chipping keepers with outrageous composure, and shooting from distance. Henry as a forward could do it all. And Arsenal's attack was focused on serving Henry. Wenger would only continue to adapt it more and more over the years. We could go on and on about Henry, but honestly, let's just leave it at here for now. Because just a year after signing Henry, Wenger would sign the perfect piece to complement his attack when he would bring in another former French Division 1 Young Player of the Year, Robert Pires. Despite heavy interest from even Real Madrid, Pires would decide to follow his fellow countryman Arsene Wenger. And on the midfield, Pires was a boss. Technically outstanding, great with both feet, amazing vision, and great finishing. He really was world class at Arsenal. Heck, many fans would even venture to say that he's the best winger the club had ever had. Pires is definitely underappreciated outside of Arsenal fans, and I probably need to make a video about him. But let's just say he was so good that when he was named Arsenal's Player of the Season, the entire squad knew just how great he was on the pitch that they would do this.
The footballer of the year, and they pay homage his teammates.
Wenger would also sign quality complementary pieces on the midfield and attack, in guys like Edu, Gilberto Silva, and Freddie Ljungberg, who were very solid supporting players, able to score a good amount of goals and create great chances as well. Now, I mentioned earlier how Arsenal had a success from their defense in the past, and Wenger certainly made sure not to only focus on his new attack, because he would also build a defensive line that was more than solid. He would sign Yaya Touré's older brother, Kolo Touré, onto the squad. Touré was a center back that nobody knew, coming all the way from the Ivorian Coast League, but he would turn out to be an incredibly important piece to the defense. Originally a midfielder, Touré's strength, speed, passing, playmaking knowledge, and comfort with holding and dribbling the ball allowed him to be a very versatile defender. Not only could he defend the ball, but he could maintain possession and was able to distribute and make plays. This would make him an excellent partner to Sol Campbell, the other foundation for Arsenal's defense, who was more of a stay-at-home center back. Because when Sol Campbell was originally signed from the rivals Tottenham, fans initially weren't too enthusiastic. But Wenger knew that he was the right man to be their anchoring center back. Campbell's positioning was impeccable. He was incredibly difficult to beat in the air and was a crucial asset in set pieces. His traditional center back defense was the perfect balance to Touré's high energy defending, and this ensured that Arsenal's backline was very well balanced. Then of course, there was Ashley Cole. Many might know him more first time with Chelsea, but before he would ever become a legend with the Blues, he was a rising star at Arsenal. Cole was so good at joining the attack that many people overlook how good he was defensively. On the attack, he could provide constant width without sacrificing defensive solidity. And the way that he would attack down the wing, then make the right passes in the final third, really helped Arsenal overload the left flank, especially when he joined in with Pires and Henry. Then at goal, Arsenal had Jens Lehmann. He was a former UEFA Goalkeeper of the Year earlier in his career, but by the time he joined Arsenal, for many it seemed like he was already well past his prime, because when Wenger signed him, he was nearly 35. Many thought that Wenger was crazy to choose him as their keeper, but somehow he had a vision. And Lehmann would find that second wind in his career, being completely revived and arguably having his best years with the Gunners. Under Wenger, he would eventually win another UEFA Goalkeeper of the Year award and even lead the Premier League in clean sheets. Not bad for a goalkeeper that almost everyone thought was washed up. Now, last but not least, of course he was older and Wenger didn't exactly sign him. But Dennis Bergkamp was one of the greatest footballers of his generation, arguably having one of the best first touches of all time, with truly insane playmaking and creativity. He would be the perfect piece of seniority and leadership to help guide this relatively young Arsenal squad to new levels. After Wenger joined Arsenal, he would win the league title by his second season, then continue to finish either first or second in the league for the next 6 seasons. He would turn the boring Arsenal into one of the most dominant and entertaining clubs in the league. And after winning 3 Community Shields, 2 FA Cups, and 2 league titles, nobody could have imagined that they were ready to take it to another level. As in the beginning of the 2003-2004 season, the first few matches was setting the tone for what was to come. Free-flowing attacking football blended with an impenetrable defense. Right from the start, Arsenal looked different. They weren't just winning, they were dominating. By the end of September, Arsenal were setting the pace on top of the league. In the first test that they would really get, in a match where they nearly had their first loss during a battle against Man United. This was arguably the closest they were to losing a game in that entire season. After a hard-fought standstill in the dying minutes, Ruud van Nistelrooy would step up to take a penalty after Vieira was sent off after earning his second yellow card. And as Van Nistelrooy struck the ball, it would hit the crossbar by the slightest of margins. A complete shock for what looked like a guaranteed goal. And the Arsenal players would taunt Van Nistelrooy as they seemed to know it as well. And around this time, Man United were easily their biggest threat. But Arsenal stood their ground. Their next biggest challenge would be in November, as during the North London Derby against Tottenham, the game was once more locked at a 1-1 standstill, until Freddie Ljungberg would score a heroic game-winning goal and keep their unbeaten season alive. And with Thierry Henry being absolutely insane that entire season, a big match that would really solidify Henry's greatness was in February when he would score his 100th goal for the club against Southampton. Already at this point, Arsenal had become a source of fascination. The longer they were going on without losing, the more it felt like something special was happening. Then a month later, they would once more meet with Man United. But no matter how hard they fought, Man United just couldn't seem to get the win over Arsenal. By this point, they had reached a new record, 30 matches without losing a match. But if there were still any doubters about just how magical of a season this was for Arsenal, look no further than a couple of weeks later in April for one of Henry's most legacy-defining matches, as Liverpool took an early 2-1 lead and threatened their entire undefeated season. Many thought that this was finally the moment Arsenal would slip, but Thierry Henry had other ideas. He would produce one of the greatest solo goals in Premier League history, absolutely weaving through Liverpool's defense before calmly sinking in the goal. Henry would end the match with a hat-trick, leading Liverpool to a comeback and making a statement. And by the end of April, without even finishing all their matches, Arsenal would be named champions. And the sweetest thing about it is that they would celebrate this achievement at no other than the home of their bitter rivals in White Hart Lane. And what added insult to injury was that Tottenham actually equalized later in the game. But that still didn't matter. Arsenal were still unbeaten. But despite winning the title that day, the job wasn't finished. It wouldn't be until May 15 of 2004, while Leicester City took a shocking early lead. Vieira and Henry would lead the comeback with a goal each, surviving one last test and truly ending the season undefeated. With 26 wins, 12 draws, and 0 losses, Arsenal's Invincibles were born. That Arsenal squad wasn't just a team, they were a brotherhood. And some people might think with 12 draws it wasn't really that impressive. But you have to consider football's landscape at the time. When Arsenal went unbeaten, the Premier League was still very competitive, and there were definitely strong sides that posed a major threat. And this was before Roman Abramovich's Chelsea would forever change the Premier League, as the coming norm of overabundant finances would take the league slowly by storm. And despite other teams coming close, like Liverpool in the 2019-2020 season, who looked almost invincible, but lost 3-0 to Watford during their 28th match of the season and ending the streak, or even Man City in the 2017-18 season, while despite setting a 100-point record, they still couldn't sustain an invincible run over a 38-match season. Not losing a single match really is an anomaly. And make no mistake, for Arsenal during that season, the pressure was immense. But somehow they turned that weight of expectations into fuel. And truthfully, that kind of mental resilience is rare. Especially in today's social media driven era. Scrutiny is relentless and comes 24/7, making the pressure of going unbeaten even harder to replicate. But as impressive as the season was, it also had its major downsides. They would be eliminated in the FA Cup semi-finals, the League Cup semi-finals, and to finish as runner-ups in the Community Shield. Arsenal were also disappointingly eliminated in the Champions League during the quarterfinals. But despite all those shortcomings, not losing a single league match will forever be remembered.